We started out with from the exile to the period of Jesus' birth, when Israel/Jews were dispersed all over the Mediterranean world. And in all of these various iterations, Jewish religious expression was trying to reform new communities. And each of these communities thought of itself as the best example of a resurrected Israel. And that's why we got these various groups. Some of them are reflected in the New Testament: Sadducees, Pharisees, Samaritans, Zealots, Essenes. They're not mentioned in the New Testament, but these are the people from whom we got the Dead Sea Scrolls. All of these are various groups. They are various examples of Jewish religious expression. I mentioned that it's anachronistic to talk about this as Judaism, because the Judaism that we know today was formed almost precisely the same time that the church was formed. This was developed in the ashes of the destruction of the Second Temple, which Rome destroyed in 70 of the Common Era. So, and then last week we dealt with the nativity story in Matthew, who starts with a genealogy of Abraham and going to Jesus. And that genealogy emphasizes the royal nature of Jesus. And then the Magi does the same thing. So today we're going to do Luke's nativity story. Now this is the place where we get all our creche stuff, right? Except for the Magi, and we combine. We get the Magi and we do it with shepherds and all of that, and that's fine. But and interestingly, Luke has a genealogy too, a very different genealogy, but it's not part of the Nativity. It doesn't come until the very end of chapter 3, after Jesus has already been baptized. So Matthew starts that way, and Luke delays the genealogy until that time. But in Luke's nativity story, he begins with a kind of latter-day Abraham and Sarah story, because we are told that Zechariah, a priest in the temple, and Elizabeth, his wife, were childless and both advanced in years. Then the implication is they're too old to count on having children, just like Abraham and Sarah. And we remember how Paul referred to Abraham as good as dead. It was almost, this was no time to worry about buying a home near the school. You need to start thinking about nursing homes, sort of thing. So, in this situation, Zechariah goes to do some sacerdotal activities in the temple, and an angel of the Lord appears. And this angel at this time is not named, but an angel is a big deal with a name, whether it's named or not. And the people outside of the temple were praying. We're not told what they were praying for, but they were praying. So it's a very, very a religious setting, so to speak. And Zechariah was, of course, afraid when he saw the angel standing by the altar. Now, these angels are almost never described. Mostly, they look just like everyone else. We, because of European art, we always think of angels having wings and halos. If you go to a party and you see cherubim or seraphim, they're going to stick out like a sore thumb. They got 6 wings and they are really jazzed up. Angels look like everybody else. And the words, the Greek word angel simply means messenger. Same thing in the Old Testament. Malak is a messenger, and very often they look just like everyone else. That's why, remember that story in Genesis 19 where 3 men come to supper, and the next thing you know, they're angels, and then they're back again, and then they're God. They're all over the place here. So, whatever it was he saw, he was upset. And this angel was standing by the altar, and the angel told him, of course, don't be afraid. All right? And then the angel says that Elizabeth, your wife, is going to have a son, and this son is going to be named John. Okay? And the angel goes on and says that Zechariah, you that I'm talking to, and Elizabeth, your wife, are going to be pleased because many are going to rejoice about this birth. John will be great before the Lord. He will not use alcohol. There's our stuff that goes in stuff. Poor guy, that was going to be one part of this Mediterranean diet he was not going to get. And it drove him to eat bugs, of course, and other stories. So he won't use alcohol, but he will be filled with the Holy Spirit. So he will get the Spirit, but not spirits. Okay. The angel's not done. Here's this task. He's going to turn many of the sons of Israel. Again, this is an Israelite/Jewish context, an Israelite Jewish activity. He's going to turn many of the sons and the daughters of Israel to the Lord their God. Again, this material is written with the idea that God has not quite completely forgiven Israel for what led them to the exile. And so this is going to be part of that thing. God is almost ready to forgive completely and totally what led to the exile in the first place. And if you want to read about that, every prophet blames Israel's sinfulness for the exile. They don't say it's because the Babylonian military or the Assyrian military was better than yours. It was because of your disobedience. Every prophet said that. Now, there were prophets who said exactly the opposite. For every Jeremiah, there were 100 prophets who said exactly the opposite, so you had to wait. But the other prophets didn't make it into the canon, but the Jeremiahs and the Isaiahs and the Ezekiels did. So, that's the thing for John. Now, Zechariah, bless his heart, says, how in the world am I supposed to know this? Because we're old. And he sort of challenges the angel, saying, did you flunk high school biology? Okay. So we'll come back to his reluctance in just a minute. But first of all, it's the sons and daughters of Israel. He's going to be like a new Elijah. The very, very strong sense that in the Messianic age, Elijah would come in a new form. And he's going to turn the hearts of parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just. And most importantly, this John is going to make ready for the Lord a people prepared. And again, that's a reference to Israel. It's all about Israel. Then Zechariah says, how am I going to know this? Because I'm poor and old. And the angel now makes a confession that he just happens to be Gabriel. He is a big deal angel. He's not just a named angel. You don't get any bigger or higher than Gabriel. And so he says, my name is Gabriel, and I stand in the presence of God. He's basically showing him his ID. He said, just in case you're wondering, I come with very good credentials. And he says, I have come especially to present you with this good news. But he's upset that Zechariah did not immediately embrace this. And so he says, there's going to be a temporary punishment. you are going to be unable to speak until the birth. What could be a worse punishment for a priest? That'd be tough, right? I had a stroke a few years ago. I had zero speech, and I was paralyzed on my right side, and I remember telling God, I can deal with this paralysis, but speech is what I do. Well, the TPA did. I'm a poster child for the TPA medicine. So I know what it means to have the prospect of not having speech. And it's so basic to what we do as human beings. Okay. So Zechariah is not going to be able to talk for a while. When the people see this, Zechariah comes out and he doesn't say anything. And they surmise that he must have seen a vision, and it must have been a doozy, because he's not talking about it. Right off the bat, Elizabeth gets pregnant, hiding herself for 5 months for reasons we're not told. But remember, this is a well-known pregnancy, right? And she says she attributes this to the Lord, whom she believed had taken away her shame, the shame of not having a child. Now that is very, very foreign to us in the Western part of the world, but in that world, not being able to have a child was just a terrible situation. Now, keep in mind how many times in the Old Testament story, when things got as dark as they could be, everything turned around with the birth of a baby, and typically it was with someone who either was too old to have a child, but who for other reasons could not have a child. That happens with Sarah, that happens with Rebecca, that happens with Hannah, it happens with Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife, and these are all divinely aided births. And same thing here with John, who will soon be the famous John the Baptist. This is a thoroughly Israelite/Jewish story, completely parallel to Abraham and Sarah and other women who had trouble getting pregnant, where God had to give a hand. And it's central to the temple. Zechariah is not just a priest, he is in the Jerusalem temple. Again, this is the very center of Jewish religious activity. And the task was for him to prepare a people for what God is going to do next. So I just want to emphasize how Israelite this is in terms of the story itself. Okay. Then Gabriel makes a second appearance. When Elizabeth was 6 months along, Gabriel went to Nazareth. We're not told how. The buses were running on time, I guess. And he visits Mary, a virgin engaged to Joseph of the house of David. So there's the royal connection, there's the Jewish connection. We want you to know that Mary is of the house of David. Of course, she's a virgin, so obviously she's not pregnant. So the angel, Gabriel, says that the Lord happens to be with her. And when she was trying to get a handle on this announcement, the angel told her that she had actually found favor with God, and she is to bear a son whom she is to name Jesus. Jesus is the Greek form of Joshua, and Joshua means YH, a shortened form of the distinctive name of the God of Israel. YHWH is salvation, or God saves. So again, it's unfortunate in some ways that we do not name children Jesus. We have Joshuas all over the place, though. And that's kind of interesting, because Jesus probably never heard the word Jesus in his whole life. The Gospels were written in the New Testament, but Jesus did not speak Greek as much as far as we know. His language would have been Arabic. We don't even know whether or not he could read Hebrew. Now, Aramaic is very close, but he wasn't going around talking in Greek. Okay, so now here's the role of this son. He will be great and called the Son of the Most High. He's elevated over the John character. The Lord will give him the throne of his ancestor David. We don't emphasize this. We don't talk about Jesus' royalty. We have so spiritualized this that this is the King of the Jews who's being born, according to the Gospels, according to these two nativity stories. Remember, think of the crucifixion stories. You say you're the King of the Jews. You have said so. Yeah, all of that stuff about kingship is saturated in the 5 stories of the crucifixion. It's here in the nativity stories, but somehow we don't emphasize that as the text would like us to do. So the Lord will give him the throne of his ancestor David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. This is Jesus. Right? This is all about Israel and Israel's resurrection and Israel's new life and what God is doing to get Israel continuing its work to do what God wants to do through it. And this kingdom will have no end. This is Jesus' role, according to the gospel. Now I want us to think, what do we say when we read the gospel? Praise to you, Lord. We stand up when we read these Gospels. We don't stand up when we read Isaiah. We don't stand up for Thessalonians. We stand up for the Gospels. And these Gospels say that Jesus will reign over the house of Jacob forever. And I'm thinking that if we could do a poll, we would go to one Christian church after another, and you would say, what is it that Jesus is doing? And you'd get all kinds of marvelous stuff, and no one would say, well, his job was to rule over Jacob's house forever. Because we have seen Jacob's house as being Jewish, and that's not who Jesus is. Well, the Gospels say that's exactly who he is. That's the cradle in which he was born. Now, Mary is puzzled by this. But the angel explains. She said, how am I going to get pregnant? I'm a virgin. The Lord's going to take care of that. Then Gabriel mentions Elizabeth. And then Mary finally accepts her role. So again, Jesus' future role leaves no doubt that this is an Israelite Jewish story. And again, it fits with many other births that require divine help in the Bible. Now, unlike Zechariah's very, very reluctant response, Mary pulls out all the stops. This is where we get her famous Magnificat. There's my aphasia. Some of the Magnificat. Thank you. The recovery is not complete. So when she does a reworking of Hannah's prayer in 1 Samuel 2. Hannah's prayer is all about reversals. The strong become weak. The weak become strong. The poor become rich. The rich become impoverished. The powerful get dethroned. Those who are in the dust are risen up, that sort of thing. And the Magnificat in Mary has those kinds of motifs. But also, There's some memorable lines in this, because Jesus is going to help his servant Israel to remember God's mercy. And this is in accordance with what God had done with the ancestors, the Abraham and the Sarahs and so forth. Just as he spoke to our ancestors, Abraham and to his posterity forever. So Mary also associates this her son, the son that she's going to get, that this is something that God is doing to fulfill the promises that God made to Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Leah and Rachel and Zilpah and Bilhah and so forth. This is all a fulfillment of what God has been doing ever since the call of Abraham and Sarah. When John is born, Zechariah gets his voice back. And here's what he says. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel. There's never any question about the deity and the connection with Israel. This is Israel's God. This is a God that we know because this God called the ancestors. This God got Israel out of Egypt. This is the God who led Israel into the wilderness, got them into the promised land, dealt with them with the kingship and through the exile. This is the God who's been with them for more than 1,000 years. No question whatsoever. This isn't just a generic God. This is the God of Israel. This God, Zechariah says, has visited and redeemed his people, Israel. Visited and redeemed his people, Israel. This God has raised up a horn of salvation for us. Not humanity in general, but for us. Now, humanity in general is going to be part of this story. But you have to become part of another story to do that. Gentiles get to get in. I mean, Paul was harder on Israelite worship than anyone in the New Testament. But he says even you guys are going to get in because you're going to be adopted or you're going to be grafted. You're going to either get it by legality, by being adopted, or botanically by being grafted. But you're going to be just as much of a son or a daughter as anyone else. You will have the same status as any Israelite. An adopted son or a daughter is a son and daughter, period. If you are grafted in the tree, you can't tell the difference between the graft and the real tree. You're going to be part of it. But you're part of something that God has already been doing. That's the part that the church soon left out and started to de-emphasize and turned all of this onto its head, and that started 2,000 years of persecution of Israel/Jews. Okay. According to the prophets of old, Zechariah says, God wants us to be saved from our enemies. These are Israel's enemies. This fulfills promises made to our ancestors. And this is to remember the covenant which God made to our father Abraham and to our mother Sarah. This is all what God has been doing for a very, very long time. By the way, this is a footnote. Here's one way to get a handle of the Old Testament. And I know that you guys don't like the Old Testament as much as you like New Testament. That's all right. I understand. I want you to realize that what we call the Old Testament is the only Bible Jesus knew. That's the Bible he quoted. That's the Bible he recited. That's the Bible he thought was authoritative. And that was the Bible that he said was about him. in the Gospel of John, he says, if you guys knew Moses, you wouldn't ask these questions because Moses wrote about me. Now, we might have some very interesting discussions about how we find Jesus there, but there was no question about Jesus' attitude toward his scriptures. There was a scholar who taught at Fuller, by the way, an Episcopal priest, John Goldingay, and he wrote a book called Why Do We Need the New Testament? There wasn't a single writer of the gospel who thought we needed one, because they said this is all because of what Isaiah said, or what Jeremiah said, or what Moses said. Jesus never knew about a New Testament. Now, he does talk about the New Covenant. Where does that come from, the idea of the New Covenant? Jeremiah. You're close. Only one book away. That's Jeremiah's idea. And I love that because the word New Testament is the Latin for covenant, okay? Hebrew is berith. The word New Testament is found in the book of Jeremiah. The New Testament, in the New Testament, has nothing to do with a writing. It has to do with a new covenant. And we even get it in the liturgy when we're doing Eucharist. This is my blood of the new covenant. That's not a writing, that's a new relationship with God. A relationship that God has been doing all this time. Okay. Finally, your God, this is Zechariah now, your God is to give, this is what John's going to do, give knowledge of salvation to his people, that is Israel, and forgiveness of sins, the very sins that led to the exile. That's what God is doing in the birth of John, who's going to announce Jesus. And all of this is through the mercy of our God, the Israelite God, YHWH. Okay. Now, at last, we've got to have a baby Jesus in our creche, right? So now we go to Jesus' birth, according to Luke. Where does he get born? In the city of David, because that was his lineage. The angels declare that a Savior has been born in the city of David, who is the Christ, who is Christ the Lord. Jesus was circumcised. When? Eighth day. Why the 8th day? Why not the 7th? Why not the 9th? That's the Torah. He said, good, these are Torah observant Jews. When you have a male baby, you circumcise on the 8th day. Then you purify him because he's the firstborn. The purification is a Jewish rite. There wasn't one thing different about doing this. Everybody that had a firstborn son would do this. Then, in response, there's this guy, Simeon, shows up. A devout and righteous man. He happened to be looking for the consolation of Israel. And the Holy Spirit was on him, just in case you had any doubts. He would be kept alive until he had seen the Lord's Christ, that is, the Lord's Messiah. So he got to see it. Jesus' parents followed the law completely. And then Simeon has these decisive words. When he holds the child and sees the child, he says, this is a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel. Gentiles are not left out. Non-Israelites are not left out. Non-Jews are not left out. And this is already there from from the beginnings in the Old Testament. Let me tell you really about a great book. It's called The Faith of the Outsider. And I kind of like this book because I wrote it. And in that book, I trace all these places where you get non-Israelites who either wittingly or unwittingly promote what God is doing through Israel. First of all, it's Esau. Then it's Tamar, a Canaanite woman who duped her father-in-law into sleeping with her so that she would have a future. She saved her future. She saved Judah's future. She saved Israel's future. From the perspective of the whole Bible, she saved the world's future. That's not a bad afternoon. Right? Rahab, Ruth, and Jonah. Jonah has the best conversion story anywhere in the Old Testament, or the whole Bible for that matter. And it deals with an Israelite prophet who doesn't want to go preach because he knew how gracious God could be. And he said, I hate that. I hate when God is that gracious. But when Nineveh hears that they are under judgment, the king says, okay, everybody repent. They all get sackcloth and ashes. And in the story, even the cows wear sackcloth and ashes. I would love to see this. Now, when you preach and the cows respond, you're a pretty good preacher. So and Nineveh is the capital city of Assyria, the worst possible enemy. And they all respond to Jonah's God. So these outsiders coming in have been part of this story from the beginning. From the beginning. And it's just going to continue. What God is doing is still going to be for everybody, but it starts with Israel. Why did God start there? Who knows? Who knows? Anyone who God had chosen would leave everyone else who wasn't chosen saying, why then? And Deuteronomy says, you know what? We were chosen, but it wasn't because we were better. We were not more powerful. We were not more worthy. It's the inscrutable will of God. No matter who God chose, you would say, why an Assyrian? Why a Philistine? Why a Canaanite? Why a Jew? You have to ask God one day. Okay? That's beyond my pay grade. But in terms of everyone getting in, God has that in mind, but it's through Israel. And Jesus could not be more Israelite or more Jewish. Okay. This child, this Jesus guy, is going to be for the fall and rising of many in Israel. Now, if Simeon was righteous, Anna leaves him in the dust. She is even more pious. She did not depart from the temple, worshiping and fasting in prayer day and night. She was really something. And she spoke of him, Jesus, to all who were looking for the redemption of Jerusalem. And now Jerusalem stands for all Israel. As the story continues, everything had to be done according to Torah. And then we have Jesus' first actions when he's a child. It's the only gospel that has Jesus doing something before his adult public ministry. And he was teaching where?
In the temple.
In the temple. The very center of Jewish religious activity. So again, this is the cradle in which Jesus was born. It could not be more Jewish, more Israelite. virtually all of the early followers of Jesus after his public ministry were Jews. And they were still worshiping in synagogues. And they soon saw no reason not to continue that. Now, they were naive because this was a minority movement and it did not become a majority movement in Jewish circles. Why? Why did not more Jews respond the way the followers of Jesus did? The Messianic age had dawned. We read about it today. The people in jail are going to be released. The people who are lame are going to walk. The blind are going to see. All of that. And many people said, we don't see this kingdom. It doesn't. And so later on, Christian theologians said, well, the kingdom has come, but not completely, so we live between the times. Well, I think we made a little bit too much of how much of the kingdom came, and in our day today, I think of your sermon last week, when we read the newspapers, if we read that, or we go online, we get the news, or we go to NPR, or we read CNN, or wherever you get your news, I don't think the first words are going to come to your mind is, wow, the kingdom of God is really taking a grip here. We're scared to death. We're scared to death. So it's easy to say we live between the times. We do. But we've made a little bit too much of how much of the kingdom is that. Anyway, that is why a majority of Jews did not believe that Jesus had inaugurated the Messianic age. Paul, on the other hand, was spectacularly successful with Gentiles. And the growth for every Jewish follower of Jesus, the next thing you know, there's 100 Gentiles. And within a few centuries, the church, which was originally in the synagogue, became an almost exclusively Gentile church. And then you add to that the animosity and the vitriol between the two theological arguments. For a long time, this was an intramural Jewish debate. If you read the book of Acts, they're in the synagogues and they're saying, I'll see your verse and I'll raise this verse and Jesus is the Messiah. And they're saying, no, Jesus can't be the Messiah because this didn't happen. And that's the debate. And as late as the 4th century, there are still Christians who are following the Sabbath, worshiping on the Sabbath, and they are in the synagogue. But in time, the church all but forgot its Jewish roots. They forgot the cradle in which Jesus was born. We recite the Nicene Creed every week. What does the Nicene Creed tell us about the Old Testament? That God created. Not one word about calling the ancestors, not one word about rescuing Israel from Egypt. And all of a sudden, the church becomes a New Testament church, and it becomes not only forgetting of its Jewish roots, but now it anathematizes Jews. And that has happened for 2,000 years. Let me say one more thing, and then we'll open it up. Three university presidents have gotten themselves in trouble this week, right? Because they weren't willing to say that calling for Jewish genocide violated their standards. First of all, why should any Jew anywhere be responsible for what the Israeli government does. And why, when we respond to terrorists in the name of Islam, are we called phobic about Islam if we are mean to Muslims who had nothing to do with that? Which is true. No Muslim should be condemned for what somebody did who has sort of distorted their own religious tradition. So we still have a lot of anti-Jewish animus. I'm not talking about Israel and its policies. That's absolutely fair game to be critical of that. But to go against Jews because they're Jews, that is something that we have been doing for 2,000 years in cultures that have been greatly influenced by what we like to call the Judeo-Christian tradition. If we took seriously the cradle in which Jesus was born, it is to be hoped that would be a little bit more difficult. Okay, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Well, when Jesus pulled down the scroll and read in the temple, would he not have been reading in Hebrew? In that gospel, John, would that have been in Hebrew?
It would have been in Hebrew, yeah.
Okay, so he was able to.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know what Jesus actually said or did. I mean, is that a way of saying that? The Talmud is also in Aramaic, so Aramaic is a good, strong thing. Hebrew was known mostly liturgically at the time of Jesus. He may have known it. He may have known it. But yeah, it certainly is depicted as speaking that. But he's depicted as speaking Greek too. Right?
He's depicted as speaking Greek by whom?
By the Greek New Testament.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, the authors.
Yeah, the authors.
Take it up with the authors.
Exactly, take it up with the authors. Other responses or questions? I suffer from professorial disease, and I kept going and kept going and kept going.
Frank?
Yes, go ahead, Joyce.
I was thinking through this all with my dear friend, a Palestinian Christian, and she says, I just can't see why the Jews are chosen.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very hard. She finds it very problematic to be a Christian because of the cradle in which Jesus was born.
Well, and of course, if she's a Palestinian, she equates what the modern state of Israel is with Jews.
Yes.
That would be hard emotionally to deal with that. The modern state of Israel is not equal to quote unquote Judaism. Modern Israel is basically a secular state. And it has the enormous difficulty of wanting to be a Jewish state and a democracy, and you can't do that. And they struggle with that. That's one of the things for America and all of its problems. I like the fact that we are dedicated to a proposition. Your ethnicity is not supposed to matter. Now, often it has mattered. But at least ideally, we are dedicated to a proposition that all men and all women are created by God and with unalienable rights. But yeah, so that's a hard way to be, and I can't even imagine being there, how you could make those distinctions with when you see what's going on in Gaza and that sort of thing. But we don't hate all Germans because of Hitler, do we? I mean, at some point you have to make that distinction. Yes, go ahead, please.
Well, you say we like the New Testament,
Yeah.
and that resonates. And if I were to say the simplest and most naive way that I like it is that the New Testament God is a God of love, and the Old Testament God is a God of anger and retribution.
So you don't believe in the incarnation?
Well, explain your response.
Well, what God was incarnated in Jesus? That God that you don't like. So you're saying that Jesus invented a new religion?
I guess so.
Yeah. And then we respectfully disagree. Jesus did not come to give a new religion. He was the incarnation of the God who got Israel out of Egypt.
But what do you think about the development of the conception of God? Do you see that, or do you?
You're saying that God gets better and the more time to get, the better God gets.
The understanding.
I would say the God of the book of Revelation is not a nice guy. So I think what you're doing is you're picking those sections of the New Testament which are nice and fuzzy and lovely, and when Jesus says, well, you're going to go to outer darkness, then isn't that judgment? Isn't the book of Revelation full of judgment? Apocalyptic literature is full of judgment, and there is apocalypse in the New Testament Gospels too. So I would say a full-orbed understanding of the totality of the New Testament, you would see, oh, this is the Israelite God. Unless you want to say you don't want God to judge at all.
No, I wouldn't.
Well, the nastiness that God does is judgment, typically. And it scares me too. I mean, the scariest parable to me is the sheep and the goats. Has nothing to do with what you believe. Has to do with what you do, and both groups are equally surprised. You don't get to say, sheep here. Yeah, so I believe that Jesus was the incarnation. That's part of why the materiality is good, according to Rachel's sermon this morning. And he was the incarnation of the God who called Abraham and Sarah. And the God who told Abraham, go sacrifice this kid. And the God who said, Jonah, you're going to go to Nineveh whether you want to or not. I'm not interested in your free will. Yeah, and I think if you take a full-orbed understanding of the gospel, you start realizing how God can't be managed. We love to manage God.
But 50 people, what about 50 people died?
45
Yeah.
or 40. Why didn't it, by the way, Abraham was winning that argument. Why doesn't, when God walks away at 10, why doesn't Abraham says, excuse me, sir, I'm winning this argument. Why is Abraham arguing that? We're talking about the Sodom and Gomorrah thing. Because Abraham was doing it because Lot, his nephew, was there. What was Lot doing there? God had said, leave your home. When the text says Abraham went, it says, Vayelech Lot imo, and Lot went with him. That's Abraham's first sin. Yeah. So I mean, the details in theology nuances everything. Same way with literature, and same way with the biblical text. Marvelous question, by the way. Thank you. Any more? I've really enjoyed, oh, go ahead, please.
You said that Nicene Creed didn't reference the Old Testament, but when we talk about the Holy Spirit, we say He has spoken to the prophets. Whose prophets are we talking about? If not,
Oh, yeah, but that's, will you at least grant me that that is a relatively benign allusion? I mean, it talks about creation, so you get that in, but nothing about Israel except for the, and when they're talking about prophets, it has to do with what they do say about Jesus. Yeah, and I would just love to, by the way, there's a Presbyterian scholar, he taught at Princeton, his name was Pat Miller, and he suggested amending the Nicene Creed, just have it say, who brought Israel out of Egypt. Great guy, great guy. Presbyterian minister, taught at Princeton, Walter Brueggemann's brother-in-law.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, Presbyterians are not supersessionists.
No,
It's
wonderful.
a very clear thing.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed these 3 weeks with you. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. God bless you very much.